Okay, we got 1 minute for about 3 more people to come through the door. We'll see what happens here. Oh, okay.
John, I got the information I needed yesterday. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to hear that later, some other time. Okay, it is 10 o'clock and we'll call this meeting to order and recognize that at the office here, we're meeting in the traditional territories of the Tishat and Apaches First Nations, and that we recognize that and honor it. And I know all of you are all over the countryside here, and if you take a moment, just consider where you're meeting and keep that in mind in respect of the land and the people. And ask for approval of the agenda. Penny and Diane. Is there any additions to that agenda that somebody needs? No. All in favor? Carried. Janice, I have on my screen the big screen here. The meeting is being live streamed icon, and I need it gone because I can't see Director Cote or Jenny.
I'm not.
We're just taking care of that function at the moment.
If George is in there?
No, we got her done. Neither George or it is here. It's an inside joke. Okay, we got the meetings of February 24th, 2022. I'd like to move the minutes. Director Beckett and Director Bodner. And any errors or omissions in those minutes? Everybody's good? All in favor? Carried. Okay, request for decisions. Alberni Valley Regional Airport Advisory Committee terms of reference. Who's going to take this away? Miss Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. So at the March 24th meeting of the Airport Advisory Committee, we did the review of the terms of reference as we do at the beginning, the first meeting of every committee meeting. So we reviewed those. The committee recommended that we consider a representation from the Spark Lake Fire Department. The advisory committee reviewed that and passed the resolution. Because the advisory committee reports to the ABB that reports to the board, this recommendation is coming to this committee to recommend to the board that we adjust the terms of reference.
Okay, would you like to speak to that? Director Cote.
Thank you. So yes, it came to my attention when I was having a conversation with the fire chief of Sprout Lake Fire Department that they would like to participate in this committee. I think it's important knowing that they will be first called if there's ever an emergency out at the airport, and it would be good that they know more about the everything about the airport, who's there, what the development is, and what the future there is. So thank you.
Okay, we've got a motion before us. Anybody want to carry that forward? Director Cote?
You want me to read it out?
Sure, we'll just go with that.
Okay, that the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Service Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors approve and amend the terms of reference for the Alberni Valley Regional Airport Advisory Committee to include a representative of the Sprout Lake Fire Department on the committee.
Second.
Okay, that was Director Corbeil seconded. Okay, anything else on that? You'd like to speak to it? Seeing none, all in favor? Anybody opposed? Carried. Alrighty, so now we're into reports. I know that all of you read this like 3 times and that now we're scientists. But first of all, we've got the easy one, the Alberni Valley Landfill renaming contest update. So go ahead with this, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. We just wanted to provide an update, and I really thought the package that we put together for the schools was pretty engaging, and I thought it would be great for the Services Committee to take a look at this. So we are hoping to get interest from the schools and work with them to do these presentations and come back to the committee, which will probably be in the fall, with some of the best, or probably all of the suggestions that we received from the classrooms. And then the committee can look at those, consider the names, and potentially we can decide on a new name for the landfill. But this is more of just an informational package for you to see sort of the next step in the process and an opportunity for more landfill name puns. Thank you.
Great. So I'm taking a grade 12 refresher program just so I can do this. So Director Beckett, you have your hand up?
Yes, yes, I do. I just wanted to comment that I was actually very impressed with the manner in which you're reaching out to the schools and providing an educational platform. So it's not just about the contest. It's about the, educating our future citizens. So well done.
Alrighty, Director Bodner.
Thank you. Yes, I was quite impressed with that, with the way you have approached the schools, and it's a good idea to get the children involved about what's involved, what a landfill is, and what's involved in it, and bringing it down to their level where they can see the pictures, have some idea about what is a ton. So I thought it was really nicely put together, and good for you, Jenny.
I do need to say that actually Jody Frank, our organics coordinator, really took the lead on this. So I don't want to take any credit for this. This is all of her good work, but I agree with you all, which is why I thought it was great to share.
Awesome. Moving along here. The 2021 Alberni Landfill annual reports. And you can upload these as you probably had, and my eyes were a little glazed over after I waded through this, but I'm sure we'll have a total explanation from Paulo on this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me all right. I've put together with the rest of the team here a couple of PowerPoints on this report and the next report to hopefully distill things down. So I'm going to do a share screen here and we'll get underway. Bear with me a sec. And see if we can see it. One sec, folks. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see the title page okay? Awesome. All right. So lots of coffee. Here we go. So as you know, just opening this up, the annual report is something we regularly do. Every year goes over everything regarding operations and also everything regarding environmental monitoring at the site. So without any further ado, we'll just get right into it. All right, brief overview. The report's broken up into multiple sections, talks about our emission and targets, solid waste generation, waste diversion, landfill capacity, finances, environmental monitoring, what we did in 2021, and what's coming up next, whether it's in 2022 or beyond. And then we'll make a brief note on acknowledgements at the end here. So our mission and targets, we've seen it all before, but this is the key thing that drives everything we do regarding solid waste. So I'll just read out again the mission here: to protect human health, the environment, and maximize value of service by effectively managing the region's solid waste in environmentally, socially, and economically feasible manner. And our key targets, our goalposts, are as you see before you: our landfill disposal, less than 400 kg per capita, 50% waste diversion, minimum consumption ratio of 660 kgs per cubic meter, annual computable capital contributions for funding requirements, confirming that all leachate is treated to meet FWAL criteria. That's our freshwater aquatic life criteria established by the BC Ministry of Environment, and landfill gas generation, keeping it under 1,000 tons per year of methane or even less. So jumping right into it, solid waste generation. So looking at our first graph here, this is right out of the report. The big takeaways for 2021 is we saw that we had a slight uptick in waste material that went out, and that resulted in an uptick in the per capita waste. We were at 564 kgs per, we're up at a 597 kgs per person. Now, a couple of pieces that go into that. Part of it is there's the increase in, you know, at home and at business renovation work due to the pandemic. Organics program only shows a piece of the diversion program kind of thing, which we'll show about later. And a bigger one, with the end of the census from last year, we received updated population statistics as well that put our general population at, you know, about 900 people less than what is estimated from BC's original stats. So we're expecting to be a little bit under 27,600. Their updated data we got early this year shows us as about 26,700. So all of those variables go in to show that, you know, it changes the variables a little bit. The other piece to look at in the chart is if you take a look at our waste generation, and the graph shows that residential waste does trip down a little bit. It's still on that decline, which is great. The generated waste for commercial is also reducing, as you can see there. There's definitely some low-hanging fruit, which is the commercial demolition section, the gray up here. You can see where that portion is increasing a little bit. Again, back to, you know, new bills, et cetera, and demo work. There's opportunity to go and tackle that and move forward with bringing that diversion rate down even further. So those are kind of the key takeaways from that slide. As I go along, I'll try to kind of keep a flow going through here, but if somebody has a question on the way, by all means, wave madly at me. The next piece, waste diversion. So this is one of the biggest things. Actually, it's the biggest thing that we had last year, and that was the rollout of 3-stream. So, you know, over a 16-week window, we saw that we were able to divert out of the matter stream 667 tons of organics from single-family homes in the city of Port Alberni. You know, the tonnage, and we can also see the tonnage with the onset of the new cart system, showed that we actually upticked our recycling diversion a little bit better, whether more convenience or more material coming in, et cetera. Needless to say, overall diversion of, you know, nearly, actually a little over 60% of the waste stream from garbage landfilling into a diverted material piece there. So garbage is down to about 41% just for the single family home piece within city of Port Alberni. And that's a huge shout out to the entire team involved on the contractors on the city side. Is a major success point. And, you know, that's a major change that we did, you know, 6,700 homes. And to date, so far, it looks like, you know, from 2021, this represents 1,640 tons of material, all broken out. So major, major success. The next piece on waste diversion, organics, again, is the largest contributor. So looking at the graph, you can see we're on an upward trend, especially if you look at the yard waste compost material. Yard waste compost material, the green that you see in the graph there, reached its highest amount, again, hugely in part to the organics diversion up and the upgrades that we did last year. It also includes the yard waste compost that is already coming in and being diverted, separated at the landfill. And it also includes the private diversion. In other words, materials that go straight to the compost contractor in the valley, earth, land, and sea. When you put all that together, it's 2,200 tons of materials, all told, that was diverted. For a total diversion that you see on the graph here of upwards of 5,000 tons of materials. And other materials that we see, it reflects everything that we've taken from 3rd Ave, from McCoy Lake, as well as Bamfield. Bamfield saw a little bit of an uptick from 40 tons to about 49 tons. As you can see here as well from the graph, still a good upward trend. Some of the materials do remain static, but the stewardship programs are slowly increasing as well. Again, a lot of it can be attributed to more work, more cleanup work, especially due to the pandemic, people being at home, even though things are opening up again. There's also that outreach piece. People are seeing more opportunity to divert these materials. So now we jump into landfill capacity. So landfill capacity from the graph that you see here, I'm just going to shift so I can see all of this. Biggest takeaway that we see here is we've got, based on the annual report and the calculations we have, there's an estimated closure minimum of 2091 to 2093 when the landfill would in theory close. That then does not factor in the piece regarding organics. If we get up to between 50% conservatively of all organics coming from the Alberni Valley landfill, regardless of source, there's a potential to extend that out to 2121. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit when we get into the DOCP, but want to make a sort of a note here. The DOCP and the annual report have a very different perspective. DOCP is a forward planning document we'll talk about later. The annual report shows us our actual calculations, taking all the variables we've had in place, and looks back over the last 5 years as a measure of how we've been doing. So these are variables that are changing on a regular basis, and we see more refinement, especially as we look at things like how our population changed, how we do with a full year of organics diversion, increases in self-haul, those kinds of things. And that'll give us a better baseline. So 2022, we'll see some changes again on how this extension to landfill capacity works. So shift down a little bit further and just bear with me. I'm just going through my notes. The 2020 values that we had, they're all based on modeling from the DOCP. With the annual report, we've got a utilization here, airspace utilization of, it works out to 568 kilograms per cubic meter. And that's still static from 2020. Now, part of that is, the population change, the organics piece that we pulled out of it, and the slight uptick in waste material because we saw people doing more things. But the other piece too is we're trying to refine calculations a lot more with regards to how the landfill and that specific cell, how you build it. So we're doing some different modeling on how we survey. We survey each cell to look at opportunities to compact materials more in the same cubic meter of space. The idea is if you pack more material in, you're going to extend the life of the landfill because there's still that leftover airspace to use. So that's kind of a key takeaway in there. Bear with me. And that is about all I had on this. We'll still expect to see the numbers differ a bit, but slowly align over a couple of years. There'll still be a gap. So we would see that, planning would in the DOCP material would show us that we'll have some larger extensions once we do additional compaction of waste and things like that. That's something that'll be revised every 5 years. The annual report, once we get back to 2022, we should be able to see even better an extension that aligns with that. Once again, we have a full baseline of data under our belt. But all in all, good paths forward so far. Getting into finances. So if we take a look, graph shows you the reserve funds. Total AV system costs over the previous year are up about 7%. Net system costs, which would include everything, landfill, waste diversion, administration, Bamfield, Third Ave Depot, all of that, are overall up about at 8.7%. But a biggest thing that really contributes into that, and you could take a look at the reserve funds calculation as a takeaway, we've put that that has been up. It's reflected in the financial plan, and that has a lot to do with the grant spending that was involved with the AVL upgrades that were completed last year to accommodate more waste segregation, as well as the curbside material that we've been collecting under 3 stream. As it stands, as of 2021, we had $2,470,524 in closure and post-closure reserve costs. And shift this again. And you can see things look still quite static for our capital fund and our post-closure fund. It's still going in a good direction, but more still needs to be done as a takeaway. Another takeaway here, and we'll see it more in the 2022 report, is the DOCP, now that it's been finalized, has updated present day costs of what needs to be put away for funding. So we're going to see a change in 2022. We've seen it in the financial plan, and we'll see it when we get into the 2022 annual report next year. And that'll reflect more 2021 dollars on what needs to be put away for the eventual closure and post-closure monitoring of the landfill. That's the big takeaway from this slide. Environmental monitoring. I'll touch briefly on this and just kind of go through the flow of everything in here. But AVL, as we know, it's founded on a natural bedrock basin. Engineered berms and leachate collection systems are in place. I've got a couple of graphics to show you how those work. And everything is collected in what's called the equalization and aeration pond in the southeast corner of the landfill. Everything collects to that point and then discharges through the leachate pipeline to the city of Port Alberni's treatment lagoons. Approximately 549 cubes of leachate were treated in the Sea Lagoon for 2021. And that's up slightly from the previous year of approximately 500,000 cubes. And a lot of that had to do with the severe, rain events that we saw, especially in the latter part of last year. How monitoring works. Water quality monitoring is conducted quarterly. That's with field samples collected by ACRD staff. It's a change we made last year is involving our water operations staff, as they're heavily involved in these sorts of things on the water side in the other functions. And so they worked with Pito Associates, our consultants, to go and conduct sampling in our landfills for the last 3 quarters of the year. Really great process. So we'll be moving forward with refining that process as we go forward. I'll talk a little bit about that under projects. Data is reviewed by accredited lab, and Pito Associates have provided a 2021 report, as you've seen attached. And if we move forward again, this is how everything kind of operates. So the gradient that you see, this is an overview of the landfill. You may have seen this before. And so the blue arrows indicate how everything, oh, I'm sorry, there's a question from Director Cote.
Thank you. I could have waited till you were finished this. On your last slide, you pointed out that monitoring was done quarterly, and I'm wondering why it's not done monthly.
That's a great question, Director Cote. No, under the Ministry of Environment criteria, or I should say actually their regulation, the requirement is for any active landfill, it's quarterly sampling. Unless if they have any specific orders on anything regarding a landfill, they can always ask for monthly, but under the regulation, it is quarterly. And then there's an annual summation as well. So there's some samples that are taken on an annual basis as well. All of that is combined in for the water monitoring report. So that's why it's not monthly. That's fairly standard with any of the landfills throughout the province. Okay. Moving forward. Let's back up here. So on the document here, the arrows show the hydrological gradient. So where the water flows inside the landfill. You know, your natural peak is around the base of the landfill here, around the landfill footprint. So it'll head north and it'll head south. And so what happens is we've got berms installed in place, as well as lift stations located in green here near Stevens Creek, the north end at the pump station here, and the ultimate well station down below. And this shows basically where all the water is intercepted. The next one shows you how the flow will actually work. So we have under the green, any of the interception trenches that are boosted by these lift stations direct all the water down to the aeration pond or over to the equalization pond as well. Same thing happens down on this end. We have a buried perforated drain line, pitches through here. And then the red line indicates the original French drain that was installed in the landfill many years ago. And that is also a preferential channel for leachate. Ultimately, everything winds up in this southeast corner and heads down to the city treatment lagoon through this leachate pipeline. So we sample at various points throughout. We sample along the border, and we also sample from the leachate lagoon itself. And then we transmit any of that data forward to the city of Port Alberni and their team over there as well. So that's kind of how the system works in a nutshell there. And whoop, I see another question.
Thank you. So the aeration pond and the equalization pond, are they adequate for the amount of rainfall that we've had and are expecting in the future with climate change? I'm just wondering if they're big enough or if they would overflow. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. As at this point, yes, we have sufficient volume in this place because it's all predicated on in-out. So we're able to take on huge surge events like we saw last year and are able to send this material down straight through the leachate pipeline for final treatment. And the quality of the water itself is such that we're able to do that on a continuous basis. So we have an adequate size set of ponds that allow for pre-treatment with aeration, enough of a volume that we can settle that. There's always an opportunity that we may need to increase it at some point, again, due to climate change. But at this point, we're sized for, I have to look back in the notes there, but I believe it's a 100 or 200 year event. I'll have to dig through that.
Thank you. I do have concerns about the amount of rainfall that we do have and these events that we have. So just wanting to make sure that we're adequately have adequate provision for collection of that amount of rainfall.
Absolutely. And I mean, the other piece to tie into that, it is the maintenance operation piece, you know, ensuring that we'll get into the projects later on how that's all involved, but ensuring that we're able to keep things in an operating system and keep the material moving forward. With the ponds last year, we were quite low, thanks, air quotes, to the heat dome. And when we got into the surge events, our freeboard, so our gap between the surface of the water and the surface of the berm, never went beyond a meter, which is fairly standard kind of thing. So we had good space to manage the water volumes kind of thing. But you're right, it's definitely something to keep an eye out on. All right, our next piece. Getting into more into environmental monitoring, and I'll touch on it a couple of times here. We talked about we had issues back in 2019 with intermittent operations of the leachate interception wells. So graduating into 2020, those wells were rehabbed and pumps were replaced. So in other words, any of the issues with any, leachate threatening to leave the site, that addressed that issue. The idea is to try to keep the plume, keep the leachate material in and funneling through the treatment system. The 2021 change was that we we took the system that was there, we upgraded the SCADA system even further, and we added additional pumps so that we continue to have redundancy at all times. You run a pump, another one stays down. If you need to do any maintenance, you could switch them back out, back and forth on a regular basis. And we'll talk a little bit about that again. I've got some graphics there when we get into projects. The results overall, though, it is a long process, but if we take a look from 2019, where we see, you know, fall off a lot of the readings because of, you know, the wells needing to be rehabbed, things recovered quite well once we got back up in 2020 and now 2021 on a regular maintenance schedule with the added and the replacement pumps. We see some good trends that seem to be maintaining everything as far as the leachate system is concerned, so that we don't run into any risk of excursions, showing positive trends. It is a long process because, again, we're on bedrock and there's very low hydraulic connectivity, but it's something that we keep an eye on a regular basis with our consultant. It'll take more years of data to ensure that things are still moving forward. And in the meantime, we continue to operate the system and have the ability to remote censor it as far as the SCADA is concerned. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Landfill gas. So we worked with Sperling Hansen as part of the upgrade for the DOCP, which we'll again talk about later. Part of that involved updating the landfill gas assessment to include organics diversion. That's something that was started in 2020, but unfortunately not completed until they had some good estimates on tonnages that they could expect. So they factored that assessment to include organics, and the big reason for that, and it may sound repetitive, I apologize, but when you deal with organics in the landfill, you have an anaerobic environment. Because of that bacteria that gets created, that is going to generate methane. So the idea is get that material out of there. There's still material in the landfill that'll continue to generate and fall off over time. But the idea behind organics diversion is pull any of the fresh material out, prevent it from even going into the landfill and creating an additional load of methane. And ideally, it's a huge environmental benefit so that you're not creating this methane issue. If it goes to a compost process, which is aerobic, and in an aerobic process, no methane is generated. So there's a good win-win on both sides. So looking at how we slowly turn down the valve on organics in place, their estimate is we're at about less than 900 tons of methane generated in 2021. We actually dropped just slightly from 897 to 891. We'll see if that trend continues. Ideally, the more organics we divert, I guess the more continuous you'll see the drop to continue, but there's going to be still methane generated. We will not have to get into a point where we actually have to put in a costly active landfill gas management system. That would be a whole network, etc. We are putting in a landfill gas flare using a preferential area near one of the old wells. There's an opportunity to flare off that gas and further reduce that load. But we're not under requirement at any point here to put an active gas system in place. That would happen if we get to 1,000 tons per year. And so far, modeling takes us to at least 40 years down the road and 40 years down the road. And ideally, even further down the road, like hopefully never, that we would have to install this kind of system because, again, organics diversion. That's the big takeaway from this.
Paulo, can I ask a couple of questions? First of all, before we get too far away from leachate, so the infiltration of the leachates at the lagoon, so what's the outcome of that? What on the outflow, what are we looking at in release? And the sludge from the landfill or from the lagoon has typically gone back to the landfill. And what's the density of the leachate in that sludge?
The density of the leachate itself, like the sediment and all that sort of thing?
Yes.
That's something I'd have to dig into a little bit further. The leachate itself, if you're dealing with the actual sludge component, bulk of that material stays in the lagoon. There are fine sediments like what we call total dissolved solids and total suspended solids that will still propagate down the leachate line. Everything seems to indicate that we're still in well below the criteria for any sort of discharge, but I'll have to dig further to get that number out for you.
Okay,
That's something I can follow up with.
so the other question I have is there a possibility or a reality to actually mining the residue of leachates? I mean, the components that are coming out of there seem to be sort of stock components that would have some kind of a market value down the line.
Well, it's a fair question, Director. I'm not sure about the market value piece there, but the irony is in other areas where you're even processing organics, you can actually utilize your leachate to go and process materials. We don't have that in place here because, quite frankly, we don't have a compost facility on site. But it is an opportunity. It's something that we can ask our consultant to see if that is used elsewhere. That would take a little bit of research, though. Sorry, I see another question.
Oh, I'm good.
Oh, no worries.
Question, it's Diane Bodner. I see it's saying here that once we reach 1,000 tons per year of gas production, then we have to have this upgrade, and we are at 891 tons in 2021. So how would that increase slowly if it's going to increase, or would it jump up to 1,000 in a year or two? How fast would that number go up?
It's a couple of pieces that go in that. Thank you for that question, Director. It's a couple of things that go into it. One, and I apologize, I'm drawing in the air here, but when you put in any of the organic material, when it starts to break down, you have your initial spike where it's generating methane. So it slowly climbs, but then it also decays within a few years, and it'll slowly fall off over time. So I guess put it differently and trying to visualize this, think sort of old waste, new waste. Older waste is going to be generating much less methane, older organic waste, compostable waste. Newer compostable waste will generate more, and the sum of that is going to see a slow change, whether it's a slow increase or a slow decrease. Ideally, it's a slow decrease if you're preventing a lot of that fresh organic material from going in. So the trend that you'd see, you wouldn't see a light switch that suddenly you're jumping up over 1,000 tons per year. It doesn't work that way because it is a very slow process. What's going to happen realistically is it's likely going to remain static around that 900 and will slowly drop off. And we'd especially see that over a few years as we slowly divert more and more organics. We talked about the 2,200 tons that we diverted so far. There's still material coming in on the commercial side. There's still material that comes in on other sources, and there's the opportunity to redirect a lot of this through over to the self-haul feature. So in other words, divert more so that less is going in. We should not see an increase, but again, it's going to take a few years to assess that going forward. And that whole modeling, that's why we're talking 10s, 20s, 30s of years in the future as to whether or not we would actually put something in place. If you're removing more of the material, you're pushing that timeline out much, much further. I don't know if that helped answer your question, but.
Thank you. Yes, and technology is changing all the time. I mean, in another 100 years, how good the landfill is, they might be able to just zap it and it disappears.
You never know. Technology, right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let me jump ahead. I just jumped into projects, so let's do that. Getting into the first one, we talked about it, and we just love talking about it because it's amazing. The 3-stream and organics diversion was just ridiculously successful last year. 16-week window, we saw 667 tons of organics. We even saw a slight increase in recycling, went up to about 232 tons from approximately 200. And, it dialed down to about 659 tons of garbage that came out of there, where prior to that, it would have been well over 1,000. Massive, massive diversion just from that brief snapshot in time. And it sets the stage again for what organics looks like, going forward. And it was a massive team that went behind all of this on the city side, on the staff side, contractors. Not enough words. It was an incredibly successful program, and hopefully we see more of that. Next project. And I'm going through some of just kind of the key highlights here, but like I say, stop me if you have any specific questions. We talked through monitoring program improvements. So what I've showed here, there's a couple of the pieces where we're actually at this point here training with the consultant, and we're onboarding our water operations staff. So they kind of took it, they ran with it, and did a fantastic job of sampling. So now the opportunity is such that they're able to continue the sampling, send everything forward, and then accredited lab takes it from there, and analysis goes through PTO. So far, the interaction seems to be working really well, and we'll be working to develop procedures as well on a regular basis, such that it's just literally plug and play. But a great job was done by the team doing this work. The other piece, and I thought I'd add this pictorial in here. So this is a screen that you see. It's a satellite view of the actual SCADA or the actual landfill site. But this is what you would see if you remote into our SCADA system. That's what the operators see. And so just super brief, the blue icons that you see show our pump stations. They'll show what our water reservoir is. That's the McCoy Lake Tower, lift stations as well around the transfer station area. And it'll show us levels. It'll show us operating times for pumps. It'll provide, as you can see from the snapshot up at the top, alarm banner and pop-ups to our instrumentation contractor, to our on-site operator to say, hey, there's something going on. They can remote in, take a look. Okay, we're fine. Or they can remote in and like, no, there's something that needs to be drilled down further. And then they make a plan and work with the instrumentation contractor to do any fixes that need to be completed in short order. Very cool system. I love geeking out about it, so I won't take up too much time, but yeah, this is one of the biggest results of this upgrade. So this is a very important tool that our operators use in managing how our water systems run out there. Talked a little bit about the upgrades that we did. It was organics, but it wasn't just organics. We did massive upgrades to the transfer station itself, new access roads, tipping bin walls, a lot of earthworks that were done, and infrastructure that was put in place. We've got the area where we offload our curbside trucks. We've got tipping walls laid in place here for any depot material, slowly moving that down, and opened up the parking areas for whether we're working day or night, adding directional signage, you name it, for a lot of the folks. So it seemed to work out really well. A lot of people gave a lot of thumbs up as they worked through the system kind of thing. It was definitely a big change because it looks like a brand spanking new transfer station. So that's where we landed on that. Other projects completed. Asset management plan is an ongoing piece there. What was done in 2021 is consultant completed their site inventory. So not just here, but as well as the West Coast, et cetera, went through all of our sites and established their life cycle pieces to work forward with on all of our site infrastructure, Alberni Valley Landfill, Bamfield Transfer Station, our Third Ave Depot, things like that. We also rolled out, or I should say expanded on the Sort and Go app, the waste app. And just some brief takeaways from here. We garnered 4,300 users in 2021. Three Stream had a lot to do with that, with a lot of the alerts that went out. So out of the 4,300 users, roughly 3,500 came on board in the beginning of September, downloading the app, utilizing the app, however they did it to get all of their, their schedules, their how do I dispose of blah, all of those sorts of things. And in 1 year, the app was accessed over 50,000 times. So really successful campaign. It's a very useful tool. We try to market as much as we can. And yeah, The next piece was the Bear Aware campaign, and that was tied in directly with the street stream work. 2021, we worked with WildSafe to provide educational awareness to residents in the Alberni Valley and landfill. We conducted improvements on waste collection in Bamfield as well as the Alberni Valley. Whether you're talking Bamfield, we're looking at changing out bins with the contractor, putting in more robust bear resistant, not bear proof, but bear resistant bins in place, and ensuring at the Alberni Valley landfill itself, ensuring proper fencing, electrical fencing, everything stays in operation to keep those wildlife attractants out. It also did a great job on the WildSafe group side there, where they promoted best practices for residents, such as inclusion of electrical fencing and bear-resistant containers of their own, collection retainers. And then the next one was the Third Ave Depot. That was a socially focused RFP. So as you know, we switched out contractors to the RFP process last year. The biggest change was the RFP included a questionnaire, and now it's a standard piece where you're looking at those businesses that create training and employment opportunities for people facing systemic barriers to entry into the mainstream labor market, as far as operating things like the recycling depot is concerned. So the questionnaire is always asking, as a public process, how do you as a company factor in these kinds of concerns? How do you bring these folks into the conversation and boost the local economy, as it were? So those are kind of the big successes that we had in 2021. And a couple more projects. The meteorological station is something we installed out at the Alberni Valley landfill. And that's intended to monitor representative weather and precip data in the Alberni Valley to support landfill gas monitoring, the pilot project that we're working on with Vancouver Island University. And it's being utilized by not just us, not by VIU, but also by the province. The province utilizes some of this data. They're able to remote in and get some additional data sets of climate, because as it stands, the only real station that they had utilized up until this point was down at Avra, which is not necessarily representative of the entire valley. So now they have a couple of sets of data point to allow for more mapping. So that system was installed back in September and is now online and transmitting data. And the team at VIU is working on this as well to continue forward with their projects. The other piece that we talked briefly about the leachate wells. I think that was back to earlier question we had in the presentation. So this is just the inside of the new leachate building. So the 4 white boxes that you see, essentially, they're controllers. The takeaway is that each of these provide a readout on each of the pumps. Everything that runs either alternate pumps or off pumps, what their power levels are, all those sorts of things, and that transmits to the SCADA system. So this is the brains of it right here. This is what we utilize to maintain that leachate and water control system in place in good working order. So system is working very well so far. Now, projects upcoming. So what we've got on the plate, we're continuing work with the Vancouver Island University. Here's a shot of the team here. From the pilot we did last year, we put in temporary sensors, or I should say they put in temporary sensors with our aid around the landfill itself. This year, they're installing permanent sensors to continue that monitoring level. That's our piece of the project. And then while that's happening, VIU is now extending as well out into the surrounding community. They've reached out to the Sichat First Nations to look at key areas where they could continue additional emissions monitoring. When VIU started this process, the idea was slowly build a chemistry profile of what a landfill looks like, constituents that you would find whether you were monitoring, from hand sampling or using the mobile lab that you see pictured here. So this is building on that program and getting a more kind of all-encompassing picture of here's what things look like here, here's what things look like from any sort of source kind of thing. So some more work happening this year. Hope to have an update for you folks towards the beginning of 2022 on how things went. Landfill gas flare installation, we talked about that briefly. That is going in this summer. We hope to wrap that up I'm hoping by mid-July or so. But ultimately, what's going to happen is area that actually VIU had identified where we were seeing concentrations of landfill gas. We've actually used that area as a preferential drain point or channel where we're installing the landfill gas probe. It's like a tiki torch, so it literally will be passive and only activate as landfill gas levels emit up and build up to a certain level there. Very low. It's not the same as an active landfill gas system. That's way more expensive. This was just more an opportunity to further reduce that methane footprint, as it were, and safely flare off and destroy that gas before it becomes a harmful constituent. The McCoy Lake Pump Station, which I think has been talked about for quite a long time, that goes to the tower that you see pictured here. And so we do have the station now from the city of Port Alberni, and we're actually going to be starting installation here in the next couple of weeks. Hope to have it wrapped up by the end of June. And so what that does is that lift station is a newer model that provides water for the McCoy Lake Tower Reservoir, and that gives us our fire protection for the site and our area operations as well. So that's what that is designed for. And then finally, it's procedures. You know, we've done a lot of these, whether big or small upgrades at the landfill, and specifically at the landfill. So a lot of it is procedures. So now we've got all these pieces in place. We're going to be refining those procedures with the group from VIU, with our water staff, with all of our contractors, so that there's a go forward every single time. Anybody coming in can always pick it up and run any portion of our system. Other projects. We have the Alberni Valley Recycling Collections contract. That's the RFP award for Beaver Creek, Hupetcheset, and Sechot First Nations for curbside recycling. And that'll be coming out shortly here for contract award. We'll bring that back for board consideration. Solid waste bylaw is a longer range piece of work. We'll be doing some of this stuff over a couple of years, but ultimately we're trying to see a more complete picture of what waste is like. We know what comes through our doors. We know how the stewardship agencies work. What we don't see is what a lot of the companies are diverting on their own. If they're doing some various works and all that sort of thing, if they're, you know, the easiest one is recycling metals, that immediately goes into a metal recycling stream that we don't necessarily see, but the work is being done in the Alberni Valley. So it's putting in some mechanisms in place so that we can get the data to get a more complete picture of exactly how much material is diverted from the Alberni Valley landfill, whether inside our system or outside of it. We're looking at investigating baling of recyclables. That's consolidation of any of the recyclables that come through the Alberni Valley system there. So an investigation piece in place right now, look at cost, look if it makes sense to realize some efficiencies, and see if we're able to take all that into account and consolidate recyclables before they leave to a larger material resorting facility for post-processing. We're doing some upgrades on AVL lighting, just more around, you know, safety and all that sort of thing. It's, of course, it gets dark around, you know, 4:30 in the winter months. So based on all the upgrades that we put in place, we've added some lighting. We'd like to do some additional ones now that we field tested in place. That's what's going to be involved throughout the year. And let me just shift this over again. We're continuing work with on the landfill tenure. So that's working on establishing, you know, long-term Crown Grant tenure for the AVL site to replace the existing tenure land parcels. The landfill is made up of several little provincial tenure parcels. So we're working with the Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resources, which I believe has a different name now. And we're also working with the Sechot First Nations through them on the consultation piece. So a working group has been derived from that, which involves ACRD staff and Sechot staff as well, and we're meeting on a quarterly basis. We're continuing work on construction demo diversion, as we talked about with waste diversion chart, that second slide, I believe it was. There's definitely opportunity to divert more of that material. So that's an ongoing project. And then a longer range project will be updated, the solid waste management plan. That'll be coming up approximately 2023, 2024. And at the end of all this, just a quick shout out to everybody involved. It took a village. So, both staff, contractors, and the public for being, patient with us through all the changes that we did. We've seen the before and after picture of the landfill. Yeah, that's about it. So I'll open it up for any more questions and I will stop sharing.
Go ahead, Director Corbeil.
Thank you. Paulo, you touched on metals, and I see in this one graph in 2019, 7% of metal made it into the landfill. Is that how I read that?
Let me just back up here. Sorry, Director, can you give me the slide again? I just need that for reference.
I think it was on, well, it's in this annual report, actually. It wasn't.
Oh, there you go. I get you. That actually is the waste diversion piece. So that's how much material came out, or put differently, prevented from coming into the actual landfill, whether it was diverted at site or it went straight out to a steel recycling company.
So on that same graph, 7% of building materials, how is that reallocated?
The building materials is a conglomerate. So what you're seeing in there is what we call, your construction demolition material there. So the building materials is anything that wasn't separated out. There actually could be metal in there and cabling and, pieces of insulation and those sorts of things there. So different material, but that material, it gets back to that original conversation I was having earlier, where there's opportunity to put in place additional tools to divert that material, whether, we're increasing incentive to self-haul it over. There is existing drop-off to take that material, or we do it through bylaw.
Okay, my last question. We had a resident approach City Council talking about the Sweden's recycling, and very, very little waste makes it into the landfill. And when I did a bit of research, they break up the recycling into many different components, but a large amount, 50% approximately, gets burnt. And I wonder, have we ever approached the paper mill to ask if there's excess capacity to burn things that, obviously not dangerous things, but things that could be burnt at high temperatures?
Not in the realm of, and this kind of goes a bit before me, but not in the realm of other materials that are not cellulose based. They're able to take, waste paper materials and all that sort of thing as a feedstock. I know that. But beyond that, and I mean, they can use hog fuel as well. There is always that opportunity. There's a lot of volume of that out there. But for other waste materials, if I'm understanding you correctly, we can ask the question. Let's put it that way. I don't know if they can take it. It really depends on that, because then it starts going into the realm a little bit of waste to energy. And I know there are definitely challenges with using that sort of thing as a heat source or a power source for their processes. I am aware of a couple of areas in Canada. I think one is being assessed in Nova Scotia, where they are in that realm of waste to energy, kind of a different sort of setup there. But even in their scenario, they're very specific on the waste materials that can physically go into that system. So they talk about not metals, not this, not that, but they can take certain compostable materials in quite easily. So it's something to look into for sure.
We've got Director Jack and then Director Bonner.
Okay, thanks. The question I have has in regards to the, I think it was the finance section of the presentation. I would just note that we're making contributions to the reserve fund, but given where inflation is going, is that something that is automatically going up in regards to just how we approach budgeting in general, or is this something that we need to think on in the future? Thanks.
Do you want me to take that one, Paulo?
Go for it, Terry.
Sure. So the closure fund calculation is an interesting one, and we do adjust for inflation every year. This year, with having the new design, operation, and closure plan, which you're about to receive next, there was a large difference between even our inflated numbers that we had taken from 2012 to today to what the new estimates are. So up until 2020, I would say that our reserve looked like it was on pace for when we estimate closure to be. Whereas in 2021, we were about $1.2 million shy. Part of that is because we used to only have to monitor for, I believe, 25 years. Now the regulation is we're going to have to monitor for 100 years. That might get lessened over time as we have different engineering reports post-closure coming through, but that is kind of the regulation now. So we will be talking during 2023 budget season about increasing that amount. I think we are going to have to start increasing it. Is it any less funded than what our other reserves are? I would say no. And part of me is like, it is a liability on our books. It's not like a reserve fund like our other funds. It's considered a liability, but our ability to tax for it doesn't end the day our landfill closes either. So I'm not concerned about it being completely closed. I'm going to be concerned if it starts getting wider. For sure, we're going to have to address that. But we will have the ability to tax once it's closed for some of it, especially the monitoring costs. Those ones, as much as I need to quantify those and put them on the books from a PSAB or an accounting standard, the ability for us to continue to do that, I think, is a realistic thing, but we need to make sure that as those costs are coming along, that we are accounting for them. And I think, Paulo, you're going to talk about the closure in the next report as well. But the other thing that this one does is has a phased closure approach, which our old closure plan didn't have. So it's actually doing the AV landfill in 4 phases. So at this point, the first closure date is like 2046. So we'll need to make sure that we have the money for that for sure. But yeah, definitely are keeping an eye on inflation and gonna need to be increasing those numbers slightly, but it is definitely something on our radar.
Great, Director Bonner.
Thank you. Oh, I wanted to know, like, how much asbestos do you get? And from what I read, the asbestos that you do get is put into a drum. And where does that asbestos go then?
So the asbestos actually, we don't receive it in drums. Under the whole abatement rule with work safe, any sort of demo work and all that sort of thing, and our processes, everything gets bagged in 6 mil poly, these yellow and white bags that you'll see around town at demo jobs. And so the material, I don't have it handy right now, but we do receive a fraction of the material is definitely asbestos, comes into a controlled area. In other words, we have the area of the landfill, and on the area of the landfill, we dedicate a cell where asbestos physically goes. And the idea behind that is, from a safety standpoint, everything is fine so long as it remains bagged. When you bring it in, if you're coming in as a contractor, what have you, customer comes in, there is a pit ready for them in the specific dedicated cell. That customer will come in, pitch everything off into the waste cell, and then our operator will turn around and take the soil pile that they used and push that over top so that none of the actual asbestos bags get ruptured, compact everything into place. It stays sealed off in the landfill, but that is isolated in a separate portion of the landfill in that area.
So does so it's buried and it doesn't decompose?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Or we move along to the next monster report.
Okay. Let me just switch gears for a second here, folks. There, and we're there. And we'll go to slideshow. We'll do a share.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, can everybody see the title screen? Awesome, 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 awesome. Okay. On Front Street, this is not light reading at all. So, design operations closure plan. Just a brief overview, so I'll just go right to the introduction slide. There we go. So the document was put together in 2021, by the end of 2021, by Sperling Hansen Associates. The big takeaways from it. This is essentially the how-to manual for the landfill, but it's bigger than that. It is a planning document. It is a regulatory requirement, and it provides us that future forecasting piece. It talks through environmental and financial performance, focus on protection of the environment, value to community, and forward-looking to maximize the performance. In other words, all of these best practice things we'll talk about as we go forward here, whether you're compacting waste, you're diverting, you're ensuring your cover material is in place, you're ensuring no leachate is getting off site, you're ensuring you're controlling stormwater, surface water, and you're using the BC landfill criteria as a guideline. And the reason I say guideline is the criteria is utilized such that best practices, wherever you can put them in place, they have the most updated info, at least as of 2016. So we're able to use those tools as we slowly build out the landfill. And one of the biggest things we'll talk about, as Terry referred to earlier, is progressive closure. So we'll get right into it. Brief overview, we know where we are. The site is north and west of Port Alberni. It is a strategic asset just based on location. The next closest sites are West Coast Landfill, Comox's, and Nanaimo's landfill. So this is kind of a key hub for anybody kind of passing through this area, within this area, for where you deal with solid waste. Briefly, we're still working through landfill ownership tenure. We've got fairly good road access, and it's an old site. It goes back to the 70s. And it's got power and water, and it's got a good internal network to get around the site, whether you're diverting waste, you're doing monitoring work, you're doing maintenance, you name it. The structure is, again, super technical document. It's fairly heavily involved, and again, it's a highlight. So the structure is based on how the province would like to lay out everything in place. And the theory is, this takes you right from the history of the landfill itself, right through to how it's being designed, how you sculpt the hill, geotech, lifespan, what it's forecasting, again, what it's going to be looking like in theory in 5, 10, 20, 100, 200 years, how you fill, how you manage materials, how you operate, environmental systems, fire safety, cost analysis, and ideally is a planning document. Now, because it forecasts in a very long direction, ideally it's done an update every 5 years. And the reason for that is to update those current day costs to understand exactly where we're at and what we may need to store away for reserves. Really big piece to this document. So I'm going to touch on, as we go through, some of the sections, some of the key sections, and some of the takeaways. I'll try not to blow through it too much. It's, again, a lot. As we talked about earlier, regulatory constraints and design objectives are in place here. I put in some of the kind of the key highlights that we look at, but Sperling Hansen did a preliminary conformance comparison. Here's what the criteria looks like, and here's what the landfill looks like. Looking at setbacks, where they're at. Are there any? Are they in place in 50 meters? From the boundary to the land parcel? What's the contaminating lifespan? Contaminating lifespan, you'll hear me refer to a fair bit. And the idea is, when a landfill closes, how long, in theory, is material breaking down until it's no longer of a concern? So your contaminating lifespan of a landfill is fitted in under the criteria in different sizes. And it literally goes through a 30-year closure and a 100-year post-closure, or a 100-year, and it gets up to a 200-year post-closure. Right now, out of default, that's where our landfill sits. So, you're looking at, the year, 24, 2500 kind of thing, when in theory, you would never have to monitor the landfill again if nothing changed, no tech changes. We know that's not real, but that's how the planning looks as far as the regulatory piece is concerned. It goes through cover design. It goes through how long monitoring maintenance is, and it gets into specific design criteria. So landfill design. These are some of the key takeaways here, but I'll actually shift to the next slide just for some highlights. You're looking at maximizing capacity, where your cover is coming from, how you phase in your closure of the landfill, the types of systems that you use on a go-forward basis, how you maintain your buffer, in other words, where your toe of waste is as you build a hill upwards, how your slopes look, what the total crest is going to be like, the top of the hill that you're sculpting to ensure that you have proper drainage, how you're accessing the material. As you make the hill bigger, you need to be able to access various points on that, whether you're landfilling or you're monitoring after the fact and you're checking cover systems, how you build downshoots, how you deal with surface water, and where your borrow areas are going to be for cover material and for construction of your landfill cells. And now we'll go through a satellite map here. And I'll bounce back and forth between these two, and I apologize for this, but so here is the site looking overhead in winter. This is approximately 3 months ago. And looking at the hill from on high, this entire area is where the landfilling area is. We'll talk through the various phases. You could see the leachate lagoons, the aeration and equalization ponds here, the southern areas. And we'll talk through the phases where the access roads are. These little areas that are outlined are the current fill areas where we're building cells. And those cells build up to approximately 3 meters high, X amount of meters wide, as they build them in sort of a honeycomb shape kind of thing. So this is where we're working right now. And yeah, that's kind of the key takeaway from that. Now, that's what it looks like now. This is what it's going to look like in the future. So this is full build out. And so again, we've taken the hill and put it on its front. It shows the buffer zones to the end of the parcel. It shows the contours every 5 meters on how big the hill is going to get. And it also shows conceptual design of where the access roads are going to be. You break it up about every 15, 20 meters or so that you're able to access certain areas of the landfill. Again, whether you're closing off the landfill or you're trying to get traffic, the larger commercial traffic through to drop off waste safely, move off site, and then let the operators come into play and build the actual finished hill, as it were. Now we're going to get into a section here as we go through the graphics that talks about that phasing we talked about. The original landfill way going back years was, you had a large area and eventually you're going to cover everything up. Because that's not really real because of the size of various landfills, it makes more sense, and it's captured in the landfill criteria for the last going on 6 years now, to go for a phased approach. You build up and do sections of the hill. So if you picture it, you're trying to build lobes in these different sections. So if we move down, phase 1, this was the DOCP working with Sperling was designed under 2 scenarios. As we build a hill, the 2 scenarios are saying, scenario 1, nothing changes. We have organics in play, and we're factoring in a population increase of 0.9% year over year. That's the general modeling, again, as a forecasted estimate. Different from the annual report where we saw the snapshot in time looking backward. Again, this is go forward. So the scenario for 1 is status quo. The scenario for 2 is more fuller organics diversion. We try to keep it conservative, so assume 50% of organics are diverted, no matter what they are, where they are. Commercial, residential, your kitchen scraps, yard and garden waste, wood waste, all of those sorts of things. So it factors in those 2 pieces, and it also takes into account what happens when you fill your waste cell, compact it at a certain level, or compact it even further and create more space for yourself. So these are the two scenarios we're going to be talking through as we go forward. So again, our aerial view, this is what the first phase, that northeast section, looks like. In general, I'll just kind of breeze through some of this here, but you can see our contours. The difference between current level, which is the brownish area that you can see here, and where the phase comes out, we've got another probably 15 meters of lift to go until we get to top level of that phase. If nothing were to change, it's approximately 26 years. It's actually going to be more based on increased compaction, increased diversion, and boost on organics. As we build, as we do this phase, we have to think about how we access with our roads. The blue arrows indicate what is your surface water doing. So as we put in closure systems, which we'll talk about later on, creating downshoots to redirect your water, these dark blue lines that we see here, because the idea is you want to funnel it all to a collection point, follow the arrows, and you're trying your best to keep clean water clean. That's a big takeaway there. So we know we have a lot of, permeable material. It's difficult to work with, clay and things like that, but we do know that we get wet material in, we get rainfall. It is a wet area. We're going to see leachate inside the landfill. When you get the closure in place, that system kind of turns off the spigot on the fresh water that is percolating through the waste and actually keeps that clean water clean and directs it around. And in future, we're looking at ideally creating some kind of a stormwater wetland, an engineered wetland, which is commonly used in a lot of other landfills now, just for less moving parts and great method for, ensuring that, clear non-potable water is able to discharge from site. The output then winds up going over to the offsite creek, which would be Christie Creek. So that's kind of what it looks like in the future here. It's factored in as well, updated landfill leachate system. So we had them do some adjustments based on the work we did last year. This little block down here is the new leachate building and where our updated pumps and wells are sitting there. So we built around that, and that's what the design takes into account. Now we'll go forward. This is just a quick image of the southern area, looking down towards where, in theory, the stormwater area would be. This is what phase 2 looks like under scenario 1, scenario 2, either to 2061 or to 2070 before we do a full closure. By this time, phase 1 is completed. Phase 3 takes us out to 2089 or to 2102. Again, better compaction, more waste diversion. And then the last one, getting us out to 2114. And this would be the full build out of the landfill. By this time, full closure system, downshoots are all in place, and you go to the point where you're dealing with just your leachate system, your stormwater wetland, and your monitoring and contouring maintenance on the actual cover system as well. We'll get a little bit more into detail on the lifespan analysis. Some of the key takeaways here, and again, this is the scenarios that I talked about. I'm just going to shift the screen a little bit here. These are the basic rates that were calculated on for modeling. So the disposal rate was 0.564. This was at the time for the 2020 year. So we stuck with that to keep kind of like for like, but did ask Sperling Hansen to ensure that they factored in organics diversion. We agreed upon setting it at 50% to be conservative. The idea is we're aiming for higher than that, and higher than that means you would extend out the landfill. But being conservative, these are the two scenarios. You're using either your current waste to cover ratio. So in other words, how much waste is being put into place versus how much dirt cover is being put over that waste. You have to get down to a certain minimum under the criteria. It's usually about 20 centimeters or so, compacted in place. And then the rest of it is compacted waste. So this in theory is where we are. Industry best standard is usually around 4:1. So in other words, very compacted waste. Right now, a model density is about 0.81, or I should say 810 kilograms per cubic meter. Ideally, we want to get it up to 9 for the material that is physically going in. They also factor in settlement because, as we know, over time, you're sculpting the hill, it is going to slowly settle out because that's just the nature of the beast when waste breaks down inside the landfill. You wind up getting back some airspace from that. But that's something that we kind of keep as just a control factor in place. And it's what Sperling Hansen utilized for this model. 50% organics, as a final aside, is based on a total tonnage of about 3,800 tons a year at maximum. So we're estimating about 1,900, the 50% conservatively we could divert each year. And that's what the two scenarios are based on. This is just a, whoops, I'm sorry. This is just a summary of the years under scenario 1, scenario 2, either 80 or 94 years. Again, conservatively, we saw in the initial calculations in the annual report, in theory, we could get up to 2121. Absolutely realistic with the way organics is going, but we need more baseline data to see where we land. Again, this is a planning document, and the whole idea is, you don't count your chickens before they hatch. So use that as a guideline and see how good it actually is going with the annual monitoring of the landfill itself. This graphic is another ad. So we talked about phased filling. This is literally phased filling of the actual phase 1. So that initial lobe that I talked about. We saw an opportunity on the side there near, and I'll just hover the arrow here. This is where roughly the aeration pond and the equalization pond and the pump station are sitting here. There's opportunity in here to build up this slope and build this plateau out on the existing toe of waste. So we're doing that, and we're starting that this year. So the period of time over the next 20 to 30 years where we build out phase 1 involves essentially building your foundation like you would build a house. Get up to plateau, and then you can talk about putting on your roof, as it were. So moving forward, we would be looking at closure on this outward cap. Then we go and work our way up the hill. As you can see the flow. And this is all done in 3-meter high lifts. And then you get to, finally, you're up on the final plateau. Now the hill, this portion of the hill is complete, and we're doing what's called a strip filling back and forth of the landfill to make that big plateau as you build a hill outward. For comparison, we're at about the 90-meter mark. The final elevation on the hill is eventually going to be 105 meters. It takes a long time. We're talking hundreds of cells to get to that point, which is why we're seeing this visually, but at the same time, it's 30 years or so to get to actually that point where you get up to the top of that specific elevation before we go to the left and start building out phase 2. Now we'll get into materials management. This is all the materials that go into building this site. You need to talk about, the document covers off what you're using for cover soils, how you're applying it, what you're using for drainage, how you're using road crush material, topsoil. Eventually, you're going to have a final cover system that will be used for topsoil. Protection layers that you have in place, riprap, which is larger materials. So lifespan is trying to consider, do you have enough material? Do you have enough cover material on site? Do you have to get it off site? And the next graph, or next chart, I should say, under the scenarios, and I'm going to highlight these points here, where we need intermediate daily cover, borrow areas, and material haul to site. We know we've got roughly 60,000 cubic meters of cover material. At the end of life, by the end of life, we will have needed 500 cubes at minimum with full build out. So that looking at whether you're going to be, and we'll get into the next slide here, whether you're blasting out material on site, there's very limited material that you can use, or we look at off-site use. We currently truck in material from soil piles at the Avra Airport, for example. It's one of our assets. And so we utilize that material for cover operations and for general operations of the landfill as well, in order to try to meter that material out. But that said, there's continued work on best practices in this document on how to more compress your cell and really get even more efficient than they are now with how you use cover. and some of the considerations that we have in the manual. Construction demolition waste, just a brief note on it. This is great material that, again, the mixed aggregate crushed woody, drywall material that's not separated, like those harder structural material. They're great for building retaining berms, and then you can put impermeable material around them. We look at options for stockpiling that material for use. We look at opportunity for, would we be able to use contaminated soils? They could only be up to a certain level, so likely not, but there is opportunity to use material that is up to a certain level that can be used in internal operations as you build your landfill cells. Operations plan. The operations plan is literally how you're building the cell, like you can see the team here. How you can spread and compact things. This is just generally the takeaway of how they not only build the cell, but how they're going to be sloping everything so that they can move back and forth after the waste has been dropped off onto the cell. And using the operating costs that we have, link reserve funds to accumulation to the volume placed. Also look at cover materials, cover cells, and how you handle asbestos containing materials, thinking back to Director Bodner's question earlier. Access roads are considered. Signage, site electrical fencing, need to keep everything in a secure operation. How you deal with litter control, whether you're using what they call scatter fences to capture any windblown material. The objective is none on site. So continue to use the fences, continuing walking through the site, driving the site to look for any sort of material, and quick burial of waste. You look at dust control, odor and noise control, limiting attractants, wildlife, that's what you're looking at, kind of thing. So that's the idea behind the operations plan. Includes all of these different factors. Environmental control systems, that looks at, leachate generations. We know what potential amounts there are based on what the wet area that we are. Based on modeling, average, we can generate, 230,000 cubes of leachate material, kind of thing. Maximum 316,000 cubes. So the idea is to, again, divert a lot of that water and try to keep clean water clean, which gets back into that whole phasing piece we talked about earlier. Modeling was done to take all of this piece into account, and so that is all captured within the document itself. Back on this, we've seen these overviews before. Just leachate management strategy, using the system that we have in place and thinking about the SCADA system as well, how we limit leachate, how the system operates, continue to monitor quality and quantity of the material sent to the city, and promote exchange of data between our team and the city's team as well. Surface water control objectives, preserve the hydrological scale, maintain site operations, and in an ideal world, you're trying to keep flows to pre-development rates and quality. So you're trying to, again, keep clean water clean, try to limit the amount of water that is percolating through the waste mass itself. Landfill gas, we talked about that earlier. Keep everything, it's design modeling under 1,000 tons of methane generated. There is potential for, and it talks a little bit about that, for voluntary capture of methane destruction. We'll have the landfill gas flare in place. Whether that actually has an opportunity to generate some greenhouse gas credits or not, we don't know. It'll depend on the volume that is actually generated. So maybe an opportunity, but it is reflected in the DOCP regardless. And then risk assessment for landfill gas, whether it's on the caretaker residents, on workers, on neighbors. So continuous monitoring, it's all about that piece there. So best practices are captured in here. Closure system. So this is a side view graphic of the layer that we put on. Progressive closure in phases. Once you get down up to a certain piece on the actual waste mass and it's done, then we'll be putting in your waste mass and this barrier layer. So the idea behind this barrier layer is you're isolating the waste mass. You've got a good impermeable, in other words, water can't get through layer. And then you've got a barrier layer with aggregate that allows any sort of percolation of clean water that comes through topsoil material, vegetation, comes down and sheds off of the cover of the landfill. This is how the water will not percolate the landfill. So you're dealing with just what went into the waste mass itself. That's what a phase closure layer looks like. And that's where the capital post-closure costs go into. That money winds up being set aside so that you can go back later on. And then when you get to close the phase, this is the design, the recommended design that we'd be going after. Fire safety plan is fairly standard. Compacting waste, cover immediately, all of those good practices, absolutely no smoking. That's an obvious one. But the other piece there on the operational level, not just the regulatory level, is for the site-to-site operations. So for example, contact info is updated to reflect that, if something happens, if there was a call out for a fire that went beyond the capabilities of the site, it's a call out to, in this case, the Sprout Lake Fire Department, as it's within that protection district there. Environmental monitoring program. Groundwater and surface water, we talked about earlier. It's annually and quarterly. It's done in the field. It's done in the lab. Monitoring is, as we showed on the earlier map in the annual report, we're looking at on the north side, Heath Creek, on the southwest, Stevens Creek, and on the southeast, Christie Creek. And we look at, quarterly sampling for various criteria: conductance, temperature, pH under the landfill criteria. Lab work looks a little bit further and looks at a whole slew of chemical compounds. Costs. So these are really high level. I'm just going to shift this over a bit so I can see what I'm doing. So high level cost analysis. Again, these are estimates using $2021 based on lifespan of just ballpark 2100, year 2100. So the idea is, should it close then? Until we do a contaminating lifespan assessment, the assumption is that monitoring maintenance of the cover system of the site has to go for an additional 200 years. So what that means is they've established that modeling piece, taking into account a series of these factors of $2021 and looking at an estimated operating cost of $80.73 per ton. Capital costs that you're seeing here, such as the access road, filling plan, capital work, a lot of this has been completed now. Some of it is still ongoing, such as things like the water pump house upgrade. So capital costs do not actually include the transfer station upgrades that we did with AVL. This is still back to the 2020 info that we had before. Lateral expansion costs. So as we go into phase 1, phase 2 is building up on top of waste. Phase 3, phase 4 will need a liner system in place. So part of that capital cost for as we go through closure, post-closure, that's part of this work here as well. So as a high level estimate of approximately $6 million, and unit cost is based on per square meter. Again, planning phase there, this is quite a ways off in the future. Closure costs shows a brief summary on how big the area is. It's always based on an area unit cost of meters squared, and total estimated cost, again, forecasting this estimate is $15,194,000. So using all of those, the post-closure of the earlier slide, we look at a breakout tipping fee is what Sperling Hansen calculates. And the idea behind getting all those high estimates together is, are we charging enough on user tipping fees or are we not at this point? Break-even tipping fee, if you didn't put anything else in right now, is $80.16 per ton based on this modeling. For comparison, our minimum fee is $130 per ton. And that's it. I blew through a lot. If there are any questions, by all means, let me know.
So we've got a few questions coming up there. I'll start with Director Beckett.
Thank you, Paulo, for the presentation. One question, one comment, and I'll start with a comment. Last week I was in Ontario and I drove by what was an active landfill site just out of Windsor. It's closed off now, and there's a number of wind turbines on top of it. I don't know where the power is going to, but it was a post-closure revenue initiative, I'm sure. The other question, or the question I have, is both in the leachate retention pond and any other water sources, ponds up there, whether it's now or whether it's post closure, what is the risk and impact on waterfowl and anything else that may be living in the pond?
That piece, I'd look for more clarification from our consultants, but based on the data that they've taken, there seems to be no real risk with waterfowl as it stands because that aeration system is in place. That's a big part of it there. And ironically, cattails are helping a lot with that as well. So because of that polishing element, we're seeing waterfowl showing up in the pond itself. No real issues. It's definitely something that we continue to monitor more. There's certain specific criteria that are trigger points that are covered off in the analytical section of PTO's reports that look for that. So the water quality guideline has I put my hand over here, has a pass fail. So the idea is you're monitoring to stay below those values. So far, that seems to be the case. With material that is on site. And so the modeling is built out with that in mind. Even as post-closure happens, similar sort of system is still in place so long as that monitoring is still maintained. So far, no real risk that we could say, but it's something that it has to be kept an eye on.
Thank you.
Director Cote.
Thank you, through the chair. I just have a couple of questions, actually. One of them would be a conversation that we've had in the past was regarding separation of materials that were going into the landfill, such as metals, glass, this type of thing, for the future. And is there any thoughts at all about actually doing any recovery from the landfill in the future for reuse or different kind of processing? And I'd like to know about a safety plan for the Sprout Lake Fire Department. Should there be a fire at the landfill? Is there a plan that my fire department is aware of and or working with the regional district on how to deal with a fire there? Thank you.
So I'll start with the first one here, recovery from landfill. That one is not something that is in place as yet. The focus is really around diverting the material before it actually gets in there. I know in a lot of other instances that there's been some thoughts on landfill mining where you're running to that main level of capacity, but you're at that point where you've essentially closed the landfill. And now you've switched operations to, I think it literally is called a material recovery facility. There are some places similar to that, such as they have in, I believe, the UK. But that's not been covered off in part of this scope here. Really, the focus is more the low-hanging fruit. Oh, thank you for that. Is it still sharing or are we good? Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'd forgotten that, my bad. But yeah, material recovery is not really the low-hanging fruit right now. It's more about diverting the material before it actually gets in there. That's where that piece is in. We would see a different level of operation if we went to a material recovery phase. But we do know that there are other jurisdictions beyond our borders, well beyond our borders, that are working on those kinds of things. It's just, it would come down to cost. So that's one piece. And the safety plan, I know the interaction between Sperling Hansen was via the landfill operators, as well as landfill operators who were working with the Sprout Lake Fire Department. I do not know if they have this updated DOCP fire safety plan, because it has just been completed. But that is the intent, is to follow up with that team and share. I know they've been out to site, they have familiarity with the site, but any of the key updates kind of thing there, that's something that we're going to be following up on.
So the one thing about that fire safety plan, I mean, I think that really should include Charlie, because it's going to be AMA, like right off the bat. And so, you know, it needs to be unilateral. So
Absolutely.
Penny, did you have a follow-up there?
I did. Just concerns about contamination that from a fire at the landfill, and the protection of the people that would be coming in to fight it. Contamination would be quite a serious matter for anyone that's going to be close to the landfill, including residents around the area. So it would be nice to expand on that plan if possible, so that residents in the area could understand that they will be evacuated should there be a fire because of the safety concerns. Thank you.
So the one thing I was noticing in the report there is a non-smoking area. I know there is a residence on that site, and I'm wondering if that carries over to that resident area. Because if that's the case, that's not what's happening. So the other thing that I sort of wanted to mention was Paulo, on the right-hand bottom drawer of your desk, there's a large crystal ball. You haven't noticed it, but I'm kind of wondering how moving toward net zero waste and how that's sort of modeled by those who are near to that or at that, so those countries that are doing a phenomenal job of net zero. How do you see that process? I mean, we've eliminated 40% of the waste stream by removing organics. So that now we're on to the next project. You know, if I look in my garbage can, I'm looking at cat litter and you know, some paper products that just don't make it into the regular recycling. And you know, as we crunch it, then it gives us that opportunity to look at what do we do with the rest of this stuff, and like Pampers and other things like that. So what do you see in the future of that? You know, is net zero a reality down the line?
So my crystal ball, which is very, very flawed on Front Street there. Zero waste is an interesting concept. And I'm saying that in that vein because just by the nature of the industry that we work in, when it comes to waste, there is always something left. Always, 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 right? So you get right to the point of, even in the future, and I know other jurisdictions are looking at waste to energy, similar to what you see in Europe, you know, there's still a residual. There's always a residual material. So the go forward is still going to be looking at what materials you can pick out of the waste stream. And it's always going to be reducing the amount that's physically going into that hill on a day-to-day basis. I couldn't speculate on if we'd be able to get full on zero waste. Then we're, and totally geeking out here, totally getting into the Star Trek matter replicator system kind of thing there, which would be amazing, but don't know. Realistically, I do see that there will be always a need for landfills. There'll always a need to bury off something, whatever that something is. The idea is to minimize that something that's physically going into the site. So the big push, and that's where everybody in this industry is at, is diverting more. What other materials can you divert out? Whether it creates a market for that material to be used into something. And it gets back to, I think, a comment that I heard earlier from one of the directors is technology. That's a big one, right? So yeah, that's not best answer. I'm sorry, but that's my answer.
No, I mean, it's an exciting business to be in because your reach always exceeds your grasp, and that's kind of what gets you up in the morning and going. You know, like, what can we do today to fix this? Alrighty, anybody else? Nobody else. We're moving along here. So we need a motion to receive these vast reports. That's Director Jack and Director Beckett. Anything else on the receipt of the reports? Director Cote, have you got your hand up, or is that residual?
I have a hand up. Just a question around working with the Tishat First Nations. There isn't a lot in here about how they'll be involved as we move forward.
No, I understand that. Thank you, Director, for that question. It's a long-going process. I mean, everything is around the ministry's process to establish the Crown grant. Ultimately, the idea is to take that landfill, combine all the parcels into one. It's one singular Crown grant, whatever that looks like. The discussions with the Shot First Nations being held with the province, with us, is just an ongoing process. We're looking at, additional monitoring wells. We're doing staff to staff quarterly. We're just in that part is just in the early phases now. So we don't have a lot of piece to report out on, for definitely not for the DOCP so much. That's something that will have to come up in a follow-up report, is what we see happening there. But that's why we didn't have as much detail.
I'd really like to see something in this report saying that further consultation then should be part of what we're doing to move forward. I'd like to see it in writing. Thanks.
Sorry, just to interrupt. Oh, go ahead, Jane.
Thanks, Paulo. And I think that's a really excellent point. And we're actually doing quite a bit of work on that. So I think Paulo's point to the design, operation, and closure plan is that this large document is very much a technical engineering document about the design and operation of the landfill, whereas we also presented the annual report and the monitoring report before this. And I think that speaks more to the landfill operation as a whole. And within that, we talked a lot about how much do we discuss where we're at, because we're setting up meetings, and we have a working group now with staff to staff, as well as our quarterly meetings with the Sashat. And I think that because we're at the beginning stages of this relationship, I think that it's something that we want to work on and unfold. And definitely in next year's annual report, we will be able to speak to the work that we're doing in now, which is 2022, because we're reporting back on 2021. I think that we will definitely speak more to that, but I think that we're making some good progress, and I really appreciate that is something that we do want to highlight for sure.
Alrighty, any other questions? So we have a motion on the floor to receive the reports A to C. All in favor? Anybody opposed? We're carried. So as far as I know, we have no late business, other than I should have reported that we are YouTubing this live and introduce the members that are sitting here in the boardroom, which is myself and Daniel. That's it. We're a big empty room other than that. Question period. Is there anybody online that we need to receive a question from?
I can confirm that there's no one online, and we have not received any questions.
Okay, alrighty. So next step is adjournment. Somebody want to move adjournment? Director Cote and Director Shannon. So all in favor of adjournment? Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. It's really interesting. I thank God for Paulo and Jenny, because I'm sure that we would have been a long time understanding this, quite frankly. Alrighty, we're off to the next thing.
Thanks. Great job.
Thank you.